Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to Q&A number 53. Yay!
I was like, do you have anything cool about 53? Because I totally don't have anything cool about 53.
Nothing cool about this.
Poor 53.
Hopefully it'll be a good episode, though.
Yes, I think it will be. I'm excited. There's some good ones in here.
Yeah, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So we actually had two pretty similar questions come up in the Facebook group near each other. So we just sort of wanted to read out both of them and kind of give a joint response. So the first one says, "So I embark on the road of group DBT tomorrow. I'm excited, but also very nervous/anxious. More so because the way my NHS board does it is that you get slotted into a group when they are on the next topic. So tomorrow I will be the newbie in the group. Has anyone got any words of wisdom?" And the second one reads, "Hey DBT fam, I've just been accepted into a BPD DBT skills group for the first time. It starts Monday. Tips?" Sorry, too many letters in a row, and they all make half the same sounds. Very difficult for my mouth.
This is what happens with acronyms.
Oh, Lord.
But yeah, these were posted pretty close together in the Facebook group. So these listeners were just in the same spot. And I mean, I really feel like the tips that I'm going to share definitely apply to both of them. There might be one at the end that applies more to the first listener who was saying that they're going to be the newbie in their group, because I do think that's a unique experience compared to starting a group at the same time with everybody else. But the first thing that came to mind for me is to be as open and vulnerable as you feel comfortable being in the group. There's this cliche thing out there, but it is true, that the more you put into an experience, the more you're going to get out of it. So the more that you open up and talk about things that you're struggling with in group when there are opportunities to do so, then you're opening the door for you to really work on those things as you're naming them, and hopefully finding that other people might be struggling with things similarly to you, and that you're not alone. That's really the beauty of group work. You're in a space with other people who, even though, of course, no two people will ever have identical life experiences, you're hopefully finding people who maybe have a better understanding of the boat that you're in than like your friends and family and coworkers, and people who can relate to you and who you can relate to. But you won't ever know that if you don't ever talk and share. So be open and vulnerable if you feel comfortable with that. And along those lines, I think it's really important to engage in the activities that are coming up in the group and group discussions that the facilitators may be asking people to engage in. Answer questions. And sometimes, I mean, I'll speak for us. There's nothing worse than in a group when we ask people a question and we get crickets as facilitators. We do not like that.
No.
So engage, answer the questions, which sometimes is scary because you may worry about getting it wrong. Yes. 100%. Ask questions. If you're not understanding something, please speak up and ask. We love that. But yeah, make sure that when a question is being asked, even if you feel a little intimidated or that you're going to get the answer wrong, go out on a limb and try to answer the questions that the group facilitators are posing to the group and participate in the activities, even if there's a part of you inside that just like, this activity is stupid, I don't get why we have to do this. Show up with an attitude of willingness and dive into it and do it anyways. We tell people all the time in our groups, of course, nothing is mandatory. You always have an option on whether or not you participate. So you don't have to participate in things if you do feel really, truly uncomfortable, which I would say if you do find yourself feeling that way, that's a good thing to talk about with the group facilitators and let them in as to why you might be feeling uncomfortable. But there's a big difference between I feel unsafe and I feel flooded at the thought of doing this thing or talking about this versus this is a little bit outside my comfort zone. Those are two really different things. And group will probably push you a little bit outside your comfort zone. But try to go there and do the activities and talk in the group discussions. And then the final thing that I think is important for DBT is to make sure that you do your homework. Use the skills outside of group. I say it on the first night of every group that Kate and I lead. I have this moment with people. Kate knows exactly what I'm about to say because I say basically verbatim every single group. But I say to people, I say, you can show up to group every single week and you can sit here and you can listen really attentively and take in all the information and participate. And if you don't go out and start using DBT in your life, you are not really going to get very much out of this group experience. You need to take the skills that you're learning here in group and then you need to actually use them. So that's the thing I'll say here too. Make sure that you're doing your homework. Make sure that you're using DBT in your real life. It's super important. And then the other thing that, as I said when I started my response, maybe applies more to the first listener, but I think it really apply to anybody joining DBT groups. A lot of times people are really nervous about being in a room of strangers. They don't know the group facilitators most of the time. They don't know the other participants. And that alone can feel even more overwhelming than the thought of the DBT skills themselves and trying to learn DBT. It's just being in a room with people you don't know. That can be really daunting. And so if that's something that you're nervous about, and especially if you're the newbie to a group and other people may already know each other and have established connections, just try to notice if there's anybody you feel a camaraderie with. And especially if it's an in-person group, try to see if there's an opportunity to sit near them or to try to open up a conversation with them on break or before a group starts if you both happen to get there early. Just try to scan the room and see out of all these strangers that I'm in this room with, who do I maybe most feel drawn to? Who feels most safe for me? Who do I think I would most want to interact with? And try it. So just try to pick one person is what I would recommend. If you were setting a bar for yourself of wanting to connect with everybody, that probably won't be as easy. And we're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And not everybody's going to be our cup of tea. So picking one person who you think is your cup of tea and trying to connect. And I know that that may be harder in a virtual group. Kate and I have really tried to figure out how to build connections and camaraderie between our group participants when it's virtual, and it's way tougher than when it was in person. But who knows? There may be opportunities to hop on the Zoom call early, see if other people show up early, and just again try to ask people how their week was, how they're doing. Remember little details, right? If somebody shared they have a dog or I don't know. ask about their dog or that kind of a thing, and just try to connect with at least one person. I went on quite a bit there, but I'll now turn it over to you, Kate.
And you stole one of mine.
I did. Oops. I didn't mean to.
You totes
It happens
did.
occasionally.
I know. Well, and the more amusing thing is you had put a lot in your notes before I got around to it, so I didn't have a lot to say already. But you stole one of my 3 points, and I stole the other one of my 3 by blurting out in the middle of your thing, because ask questions was one of my 3 things.
You can definitely expand on that, though. I think that's a great thing to say more about.
Oh
why
my
that's
goodness.
important.
That cracked me up. Because, no, I mean, so many different reasons, right? One is you might be making it a safer place for somebody else to ask questions, right? Leading the way. It also helps deepen your connection with the leaders. While it's hard to ask people questions and have no one answer, I also hate it when I ask if anybody has questions and no one does, because I can never tell. I'm never willing to believe I explained something perfectly.
Yeah.
Even the smallest question makes me feel like, okay, good. I know everyone was listening and not just tuning me out. So that's selfish from the leader's perspective. But, by you asking questions, that helps other people in the room know more about you, right? Because the questions we ask actually say a lot about us. And so that's a way to start making connections with the people in the group, giving them the opportunity to see if you're, in Michelle's words, their cup of tea. And so that may help encourage people to connect with you, rather than you just having to worry about connecting with them. And, again, most people don't explain things perfectly. So my bet is you do have questions, probably, from time to time. And you're just going to walk away with a much better experience of the group if you actually ask them and get the answers, right? It can make the difference in really internalizing a skill or not. Doubling down on Michelle's practice outside of group. I think she went over that sufficiently enough that I don't have to do it anymore. But
really, you guys, do it.
But honestly, yes, do it. And then again, I don't think I have too long of a thing to say on here, but do remember that everybody was the newbie in the group at some point. Everybody, right? Everybody started out in the same position as you. Which means, whether or not you're their cup of tea or not, everybody's going to have an amount of built-in empathy for the experience that you're going through joining the group. So whether that be that you are all literally newbies at the same time, right? As you have a built-in starting place of being the same, right? If maybe your group all starts simultaneously, like the groups that Michelle and I have, or if you're the, newbie on the block and everybody else is already established. Either way, there's empathy and sort of a built-in connection around that experience that you may also be able to leverage, shall we say, into more connection and appreciation for the group. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I'm short on that one.
No worries. I apologize for stealing your things. Okay, the next one is rather long with a lot of detail, but we left it pretty much as is because we think it really paints a picture of what this listener's been struggling with. So, to dive in, they said, I've been trying to utilize radical acceptance, self-soothe, wise mind, check the facts, please, half smile, willing hands, strenuous workouts, which are or are not really helping. BDD also sucks. BDD stands for body dysmorphic disorder. But really anything I can think of to cope and get through my days. Recently, while trying to use Cope Ahead to grieve the anniversary of my grandmother's sudden passing, so Mother's Day isn't such a wonderful holiday for me, my dog from my previous relationship that had just ended was acting lethargic and sick. My ex didn't tell me anything until he took him into the vet and they told him he had cancer. At his age, he wasn't likely to survive a surgery, and they had to put him down that very day. I didn't get to be with him. I didn't get to say goodbye or that I loved him, how I would see him again. He was just gone. He's always been my protector. Since day one, he's loved me, and I loved him. He was my dog. If his dad ever raised his voice to me in any argument, he was on my side. If we play fought and he would grab me, my dog was right there. He was my hiking buddy, my snuggle fluff, my dinner taster. He was a million times more than my companion. He was my best friend. To add a rotten cherry on top of this crap Sunday, my son whispered to me Monday morning before leaving for school and work that he just found out he has another sister, other than my daughter. I messaged his dad, of course, to confirm, and lo and behold, it's not only true, but she is the daughter of a girl I absolutely, positively despise with all of my being. She was supposed to be my friend, but she is not a kind person and has never been one. During the duration of our, in quotes, friendship, she did nothing but betray, belittle, use, demean, and disrespect me, my person, my body, my feelings, telling flat-out lies, starting rumors, defaming my name on Facebook, and even bringing my children into things she was posting. Now, my poor son may have to be subjected to being around her, and I am beyond not okay with this. I still don't know the full circumstances of how they came to figure all this out, so many years and paternity tests later. My heart aches for the 14-year-old girl who has also had to endure her mother's mental abuse, which I have actually witnessed for myself at one point in time. I told his dad to have his paternity quadruple checked because her mom is absolutely not allowed around my son. I've already been in the process of amending my parenting plan, especially since his dad doesn't abide by it, but he sure wants to claim my son on his taxes. I'm so upset and frustrated, angry even, and just freaking blah all at once. I guess my question is, how do you even cope ahead or practice any skills for that matter when you never have a moment to catch your breath? What other skills should I be focusing on? I'm really struggling, and any help or suggestions are greatly appreciated. Thank you for taking the time to read all of my ramblings.
Oh, that is a lot of hardship in one place, in one pile, in one span of time, in one, to quote the reader, crap Sunday.
Yes, it's a big crap Sunday.
Right? It is a big crap Sunday. So I just wanted to start by saying how sorry I am that this listener is having to handle so many compounded issues all at once. Grief, and then more grief, and then anger and disbelief, and there's just so many emotions going on, probably more than I could possibly think of at the moment. So, first of all, just a giant pile of compassion for how incredibly difficult that must be. Looking at my notes here, I realized that I didn't really answer the first of those questions in my notes, which is the how do you even cope ahead or practice any skills for that matter when you never have a moment to catch your breath. So I do want to take a brief moment to just take one pass at that, which is to say, in small doses is one answer to that. Cope ahead, right? That you could do that for a minute, right? Maybe you self-soothe for 60 seconds, right? You listen to a 1-minute meditation, right? You take moments that you would have pissed away doing something random, and you try to lean into some form of skill in that itty-bitty moment that you have. The other thing that's sort of an answer to this pigeonholes into, slots in, there you go. Well, with one of the other notes that I was going to give already, which is if you're having moments of extreme overwhelm, right? Like if that's what you mean by can't catch your breath, is that you're just kind of constantly in a really severely, intensely emotional state. Remember that the tip skill can be really useful there as well. Sometimes tip is what you need to, as I say, tip your body, right? Out of the place where you can't catch your breath, right? Sometimes, getting out of that fight or flight mode is where you find the time and space to catch that breath so that you can utilize more complicated skills. But that said, I think that you're mostly on the right track with the skills that you've been using, right? You had that amazing list of skills at the start of your letter, and I just want to say just a commendable list of stuff that you've been trying. It's obvious that you are doing your absolute best here. To keep your head above water and be skillful. I might add in some accepts just because it sounds like you could really use some distraction from all of the difficulties that are going on in your world right now. I know I would, if I were you, need to be distracted from all of that. Of the skills that you did list, I would probably unsurprisingly say that self-soothe may be the one I would most emphasize. There we go. I do empathize with you, but that's not what I'm trying to say. Because self-soothe is so thoughtless, right? You don't necessarily have to be really brainy. You don't have to think too hard or apply your mind to something. You get to just snuggle up with a teddy bear, right? Or drink some hot cocoa, something that's ideally pretty easily accessed and doesn't take a lot of effort to get to when your life is so hard at the moment. And I just realized that I just got into the last bit where I was going to talk about tip, but I started with that instead. So somewhat unexpectedly, I think those are my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I guess to summarize, which is part of why I thought it was important to keep all the details in here that the listener talked about, is because the common thread that I heard reading through what this listener wrote is that there's just grief. Grief is talked about throughout, many different forms, many different things being grieved, right? They mention at the beginning, albeit briefly, but briefly, excuse me, they mentioned briefly the grief that they were feeling about their grandmother's passing, went pretty in depth about the grief about their dog, grief around the friend who stabbed them in the back, grief for their son, now having this, half sister and that kind of a thing. So this is, I think, what happens a lot of times with grief. Sure, sometimes we're only grieving one thing, but many times we are grieving many things and many losses all at once. And this listener just really spoke to that. And to really, though, boil it down to those last two questions, as you were addressing them also, Kate, I mean, that one about how do you even cope ahead or practice any skills for that matter when you never have a moment to catch your breath? It's so hard. And I mean, you were talking about this, Kate. I think it's really important to not use too many skills that are going to require a lot of time, a lot of thinking, because that thinking part of your brain is not going to be working very well. The go-tos that I would pick would be to come back to mindfulness of the present moment that you are in right now, and gratitude. And the listener mentioned using half smile and willing hands as some of the skills that they've been using. And half smile and willing hands are a great path to get to gratitude. If you do even just those things without consciously thinking about something to be grateful for, you might just find yourself adopting a more grateful outlook on things just by doing half smile and willing hands. But if you're able to do half smile and willing hands and think about something that you're grateful for in the present moment, I think that can be really powerful. And an important caveat here, as a reminder about gratitude is not meant to ignore the bad events. I think that's a common misconception about gratitude, that people think that when you're having a hard time, you're just supposed to think of what you're grateful for and then tell the part of you that's grieving or angry or whatever it is to shut up and go away. And that's not it. It's not about ignoring the grief, ignoring the hard things that you're going through, but it is meant, I view it as, to hopefully balance them out. You talk about this sometimes, Kate, of like, life is going to throw enough shitty things our way. And so we have all the shitty things on one side of the scale, and then it's finding little things that we can add to the other side so that hopefully bad things are not feeling even worse if we're not behaving skillfully while we're coping with bad things happening. So I thought of gratitude as one thing to consider. And then there was that second question of what other skills should I be focusing on? And my gut reaction, honestly, listener, was I don't think you need to be focusing on other skills. I think there's plenty that this listener is already trying to do. I thought to myself, maybe even too much. I hear this sometimes with people when it comes to DBT. They're like, I'm trying to use 15 DBT skills. And part of me is like, there's your problem. Pick a couple to hone in on. If we're trying to do all of them at once, chances are we're probably not doing any of them very well because we're just spreading ourselves too thin. It's too high of a bar to set. I do like what you were saying, Kate, about accepts and about tip, and that you were really emphasizing self-soothing, which is one of the ones that the listener said they're already doing. I think those are all fantastic skills. And so in the spirit of trying to answer the listener's question, I thought, looking at the list of the skills they said they were already doing, if I had to pick a couple to really focus on, my gut reaction was to really focus on please and to focus on radical acceptance. I think please is a really good skill to come back to for so many reasons. I truly view it as being very foundational. We talk a lot about how like mindfulness is foundational to DBT, which it is. But if I had to pick anything else besides mindfulness, I would probably pick please as a really big go-to skill to start with. And radical acceptance, of course, because you're grieving these things that you don't have control over, that have already happened, can't be undone. And trying to radically accept things as they are is really the work of grief. So that's what I really thought was most important, was please and radical acceptance there.
Okay, so the next one reads, I have been diagnosed with BPD since very early on. I was only 15, but it took me a long time to actually understand this diagnosis and reach out for help. I have been doing the work for a while now, and I can say I am in a stable, loving relationship. We are thinking about having a child. Sometimes I am clouded with fear, and I am truly afraid I will mess up this kid. I guess I'm here to ask BPD moms their experience on motherhood.
Yeah. So I don't have a diagnosis of BPD myself, but I think this is a very universal thought when it comes to becoming a parent, regardless of whatever mental health diagnosis may be at play. I was actually just having this conversation with a client on Saturday. She's not pregnant, but she wants to be a mom someday. And she was basically saying something similar. She doesn't have a BPD diagnosis either, but she was saying, she's like, I'm really worried about just like how I express my anger, and I don't want to do that as a mom, and I'm really worried I'm going to mess up my kid if they see me acting like this. And very much along the same lines of what this listener is saying. And yeah, this may sound really bad what I'm about to say, but we are going to mess up our kids, all of us. Every parent in the whole entire world is going to do something to mess up their kid. And the reason why is because we're not perfect people. So how can we be perfect parents? It's not possible. And before you get too down on yourself, because I mean that to hopefully be comforting and reassuring of like, you're not alone. It's not just that only you are going to mess up your kid and nobody else around you is messing up theirs. No, it's a shared experience. Because I think honestly part of why that is that every child will inevitably get messed up by their parents. I truly believe that part of that is living in a society that demands so much of us. It's really hard to be the kind of parent that you want to be when there are so many other demands on your time and your energy. And we wear a lot of different hats in our lives. We don't just wear the hat of being a mom or, being a parent in some way. And so there's so much pressing in on us that sometimes that becomes too much, and it shows up in how we parent because we feel impatient, we feel angry, and kids are damn good at pushing buttons. They're like the best at pushing buttons. They don't try to push buttons, but they do push buttons. After the 50th time, mommy, we all reach a point where we're like, what? What do you want? And then we're like, oh God, shouldn't have used that tone. It happens, but the way to work with this, the best things that I can recommend to mitigate the messing up, I suppose you could say, to offset it. First and foremost, be in therapy yourself if you're not already. Get yourself into therapy as soon as you can and start working on this stuff. Start really processing through your own upbringing and how that may impact you as a parent. Start processing through moments like my client was doing in session where she's like, wow, I'm really worried about how this would play out with being a mom. Start processing that stuff. Start naming it out loud to another person in a safe space and really making sure that you're taking steps to know how to get your self-care as in tip-top shape as possible. Because my self-care was fantastic and amazing during my pregnancy. I told my therapist this the other day, I was like, I felt like I was the most, I definitely practiced mindfulness more than ever when I was pregnant. I was like so connected to my higher power. I just felt amazing emotionally where I was during my pregnancy. And then this child came into the world. And I reverted back to so much of my old programming, so much anxiety, so much fear, so much trying to control everything. it just, self-care is exponentially harder when you're a parent than when you're not. So whatever you can do now to try to lay a good foundation by doing work in therapy is important, because I can guarantee it's probably going to crumble a little bit when you become a mom. And you want to make sure that it's as built up as possible, so that there's still something left, even when some of it may start to collapse around you as you make the transition. So that's the first thing I recommend, is to be in therapy. The second thing I recommend is to apologize to your children when you make a mistake. I think that is huge. And coming from someone who had a mom who never really apologized, gosh, I wish sometimes my mom would have come to me and said, "Hey, Michelle, I'm sorry for the tone of voice I used with you earlier." Or said things like, "I thought back on what I said, and I don't know if that hurt your feelings, but I really wish I had picked my words differently." Or, that kind of a thing. I think just modeling for our kids that everybody makes mistakes, and this is how you repair when you make a mistake, is one of the most valuable life lessons we can teach them. And I think for any relationship to go the distance, yes, parent-child relationships, to some extent, you are stuck with each other for life. But like friendships, romantic relationships, the only way that we make those relationships last is by making repairs, because things are going to get broken every now and again. And that's very true with parents and children. Things are going to get broken. You don't mean to. But again, when you make a mistake, if you can own it and try to fix it, that will make a world of difference to your children. And then the third thing that I'll recommend is, especially when your kids are young, I'm thinking toddlerish age, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I mean, even beyond that, those are just the years where you start laying the foundation. Use emotion words to talk about what you're feeling and to label what your child is feeling. So if you see them just starting to scream their head off about something, be like, "Yeah, it really seems like you're frustrated and you're having a hard time figuring this out. Would you like some help?" Or to be able to say, "Yeah, I know it's scary when that big loud car goes by," or whatever it is. Start infusing emotion words and showing your children that you are wanting to understand what they're feeling emotionally. You may not get it right. They may not actually feel scared. Maybe they're angry. But start using that. And then when you get to the point where you can ask your child, "What are you feeling?" They can say, "I'm feeling nervous," right? And they'll have that vocabulary because you've been feeding it to them from the time they were really young. So talk about emotions, label them, talk about, again, your own emotions, model that for them. That's another great thing you can do as a parent. And then a book that I would recommend, which admittedly I haven't read. It was recommended to me. I have it. I bought it. I haven't read it though. But it was recommended to me by somebody who I trust a lot, who's a fellow therapist, a mom of twins, really struggled with her mental health during the first few years of raising her twins. And really, openly talked with me at one point about just saying like, "Yeah, I felt like a complete fuck up as a mom," because she was barely functioning the first few years of her children's life. She was just so overwhelmed by everything that was required of her as a mom. And she said she read this book and that it really helped her. And so the name of the book is called Parenting from the Inside Out. It's by Dan Siegel, who's a neuroscientist. He's like a big name in the neuroscience field. And so it really talks about like how my understanding of the book anyways, as I said, I haven't read it, but the way she explained it to me is that it really just talks about how, when we gain a better understanding of ourselves and our internal workings, how that is going to lead to us becoming better parents. And I absolutely believe that's true. The more self-aware we are, the better we're going to parent. So that could be a helpful book to read. I feel like I talked a lot again. I just get going, and then there's a lot that I have to say. So
that's all right.
I'll switch it to you now.
It's kind of a relief. Normally, I'm the person who talks too much or more than the other person in a situation. I'm like, Michelle's got it. I can be fine. No, I don't know. We'll see. This one might be one where I get long or not. I don't know. We'll see yet. Michelle doesn't have a BPD diagnosis, but is responding as a mom in part, as well as the therapist. I'm responding as the child of a BPD mom. So the first thing I want to say to this listener is that they are already so far ahead in the game of not fucking up their children, just because they're aware of their diagnosis, the potential consequences of it, etc. So many people with a BPD diagnosis or any one of dozens of other mental health issues or other things go into parenthood. I don't think it's blissfully unaware, but chronically unaware of their own issues and how their issues can be and or are affecting their kids. That just the fact that this listener knows and has that concern, that's huge, right? Like, that's already going to make them on the lookout for behaviors that might entirely slip past people who aren't aware or concerned about such things. Like Michelle said, I would definitely recommend keeping up in therapy, right? It gives you a place to talk about, the big feelings that can sometimes come from ways children can behave. I know, right? It can be hard for any parent to hear criticism or things like, I hate you, right? Things like that, anger from their children. And I know that some of those things can be harder sometimes for folks with BPD in the parent role. So having a therapist who understands you and understands your diagnosis and parenting, you could find a lot of support there for that. If you wanted a guide on how not to parent as a BPD mom, basically a guide to pitfalls, you might say, you might be interested in reading The Borderline Mother. I read it and it helped me understand my own mom and my own childhood a lot better. I think it breaks it down into, I want to say, 4 archetypes of ways that BPD shows up in mothering. Certainly, I don't know, it's been a hot minute. I don't know, 15 years maybe ish since I read it, so I don't have a perfect recollection of it. It might, I'd say, if it's guilty of anything, I seem to recall it might sound a little bit doom and gloom. Don't think that this is how things have to go for you as a mom with this diagnosis, but do be aware that those are pitfalls. Those are places that it could go, and as a good guide for things to avoid, perhaps. And as for DBT skills, I would unsurprisingly emphasize mindfulness, right? Just having that mindful awareness of yourself, non-judgmentally, right? Mindfulness of your own emotions, and being able to be mindfully present with your child, right? In the moment, not worrying about other things, not being judgmental, etc. Both can be really incredible gifts. So I guess that was a shorter one.
Mm-hmm. Good things, though. Okay, the last one says, my DBT individual therapist asked me to write down my goals for a certain relationship in my life that's causing me a lot of distress, unhappiness, and overall bitterness. The thing is, it's a parent-child relationship. He said to make any goals, even unachievable ones. Has anyone done this? Or have any ideas of what sort of things we need from relationships? Any pointers, or if anyone has done a similar thing, would be much appreciated.
Well, we'll get there in a second. The first thing I want to say is that, Michelle, you've got some great notes down below on the possible sort of purpose of this exercise. So I'm going to leave that to you in your response. But I wanted to focus in on the element that stood out to me, which was the reader talking about it being a parent-child relationship. Now, it was only as you were reading it this minute, Michelle, that I was like, wait a second. They could be the parent, and the other person could be the child. I don't know why that did not occur to me. 0% had that occurred to me as one of the obvious options. So, my notes are skewed. Because I was responding only to, I guess it makes sense. The reason why I have that bias towards thinking it was the person talking about their parent is because when I think about, what are relationships in my life that cause me distress, unhappiness, and bitterness, and who I might think I have unachievable goals for? And of course, I thought of my mother. So I hope you find things that are helpful in this, regardless of them being oriented towards that direction of the possible ways a parent-child relationship could go. Because I was thinking, all right, what are some examples that I could give of things that we need in relationships? Is I could think about things that I have needed from my mom that I haven't gotten, and that I'm likely never to get, which include things like needing her to be able to deal with my being angry or upset with her, right? Not being, it being a safe relationship in which I can get angry. Her being more focused on what she can do to support me rather than what I can do for her. Respecting my choices, not taking possession of my successes. Those are probably the biggest of what could be an incredibly long list if I were to try to be exhaustive. If I think about the idea of things that you can need from children, I do think about things like, I don't know, respect. I think, including the respect for choices. I actually think that's a thing that is owed both directions, right? As a parent, you have your own life, right? And you get to make your own life choices. And especially for adult children, it's not really their place to be disrespectful of the choices that you're making for yourself. Other things that, whether it's possible or not, I think could count as a need there might be something like, when feasible, giving you the benefit of the doubt, right? Being open to hearing your side of things, things like that. But yeah, I am not sure because I'm just trying to think of these in the moment and I don't have great ones. So I think that's most of what I am on about that one. I haven't done this exact thing, just to, I guess, to answer that question. But I have, I don't know, written out like letters or things like that to people about things that I needed or wanted. So that's sort of, I don't know, it's not quite the goals for a relationship, but I think it's a similar enough exercise, and I found it rather helpful. So I'm hoping that this listener can get something that feels meaningful or helpful out of it for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. I hope so too. And yeah, you're right. We don't know which role the listener is in, whether they are the parent or whether they are the child. But I do just want to start by saying I really liked your point, Kate, about if they are the parent and they're talking about their relationship with their child. Mm-hmm. You mentioning respect, I think, really hits the nail on the head. I think for what a lot of parent-child relationships are after, regardless of what stage of life or that kind of a thing, is to have both people, may be able to recognize or have empathy for the other person's experience and respect it. Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
The thing that I wrote down first was, trying to take my best guess at what I thought the intention behind this exercise was from the individual therapist to this listener as their client. And what kind of came to mind for me is that it's important to understand maybe what you really want out of this relationship. And some things you may want, you might be able to get, and some things may not happen. I think this is true of a lot of relationships in our lives. For example, let's say, I'm just going to give a totally random example here. There's nothing to do with what this listener wrote, but just to illustrate the point of, let's say you have a friend, and what you really want is for this friend to be on time when the two of you get together to see one another. And you may ask your friend to be more on time. You may send them reminder texts about your getting together. You may do, and guess what? You may not ever have them show up on time. Just may not happen. There's a lot when it comes to the relationships that we have with people in our lives where we do not have much control. Because we cannot control what another person says, thinks, or does. If only. But we don't have that. But it just really seemed to me that the purpose of this is for you to gain a better understanding of what you would like, even if you may not get it. And that question about, any ideas of what sort of things we need from relationships. I took that very broadly. I think I hope anyways, that they meant it very broadly, of relationships in all forms with all different kinds of people in our lives. And the two things that came up for me that I think are really broad goals of relationships, like why do we have them? Why do we form connections with other people in general? The first one I thought of is because we may be looking for things like comfort or reassurance when we're struggling. Sometimes I talk about this with my clients as we want the other person to feel like a soft place for us to land. In other words, we want to have trust. We want to know that if we're having a hard time, they are going to hold us. Maybe not literally hold us, but at least emotionally hold us, so that we do feel comforted and reassured. That's a big reason why we form connections with other people, is so that we can find comfort in times of struggle. So that's the first thing I thought of. I think another common reason for why we have relationships with other people, or what we need from relationships, is to have fun. And that could look so many different ways, but to have it be that we find joy and meaning and connection and playfulness and just all kinds of things from doing things with other people. That's why most people would probably think it's more fun to go to the movies with someone or go out to dinner with somebody rather than going alone. It's more fun when you do it with someone else, for most people, most of the time. So that could be another reason. So I bring those two things up for this listener to hopefully reflect on, with this relationship that they're talking about, would those be things that they might be looking for, either from their parent or from their child, right? I either want more comfort from you, or I want to just have more fun with you, more joy with you. Just something to reflect on, perhaps. And it may also help to think about it through the lens of love languages. Anybody listening to this has no idea what I'm talking about when I say love languages, you can look it up and it's everywhere. 5lovelanguages.com, 5, number 5. So 5 love languages. And they really, love languages stemmed from this place of looking at romantic relationships and how romantic partners show love to one another. But those love languages are universal, I think. I think they apply to all kinds of relationships that we have. So maybe if you don't already know your love language, consider going online and taking the quiz to find out what your love language is, and contemplating what the other person's love language might be. And are there things that they can do in your love language that would help you feel better about this relationship? So one of the love languages is quality time. Maybe that's a goal that you have for this relationship, is to spend more quality time together. Maybe your love language is gifts. Maybe you'd like for it to be that in your relationship together, the two of you really honor maybe special events and special days of the year by giving each other gifts or doing something thoughtful for each other. Those could be possibilities to also just get your mind going on what kinds of things you might want out of this relationship that you're not getting right now.
I like that.
Okay, that's what I got.
All right, I guess that wraps up Q&A 53. If anybody has anything fun about the number 54, I encourage you to put a comment in the Facebook group or email us, which you can also do if you have things here you would like answered in a future Q&A. Number and awesomeness of number to be determined. Right, you can email us at dbtmepodcast@gmail.com, or throw up questions and comments in the Facebook group, which is, all right, I'm going to get this wrong, Michelle, facebook.com/groups/dbtme.
DBT Me Podcast.
I was half sure and half unsure. All right, yes, there you go.
Just searching, though, is super easy. You'll find it.
It's not like the other podcast, The Couch in the Chair, which you cannot find through anything short of magic.
Yeah, that Facebook group is just hidden in the depths of Facebook somewhere. We don't know how to dig it out.
Anyway, sorry, that's just a funny little complaint, but we hope to hear from you about your questions, comments, and concerns, as well as your, really any number that above 54 or up that you want to offer why it's awesome. I think we'd be happy to hear. So until next time, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
To
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT and Me Podcast.